It's a little girl's closet. That means we got to be ready for shoes. Simple materials for this project. What I have here is 3/4 inch plywood. Doesn't really have to be any great stuff because this is going to be painted when it's all said and done. This piece right here and the one right below it are 12 inches wide by 48 inches long. I got these by cutting them off the end of a full 4x8 sheet, but you could start with one of those 2x4 handy panels and just cut it in half. Your 12-inch dimension would come up, you know, a saw kerf short, but that's just the depth of the whole cubby and it doesn't make any difference at all. I started by cutting my long pieces in half. Then I measured to get the exact length of the whole thing I needed. Turns out to be about 22 inches, and cut the long pieces down to the exact size. The fourth long piece gets cut to form the sides of the unit. The dado stack gets installed next and set to a 1/4 inch depth. Okay, normally when you're cutting dados, you're looking for what's called a slip fit, which means you can put the piece into the dado by hand, but when you let go, it holds itself there, which this obviously doesn't do. That's because the smallest my dado stack goes is a real 1/4 inch, and this 1/4 inch plywood is in fact not a real 1/4 inch. Now in this project, it doesn't matter a lick because all these things are separators between the various shoe cubbies. So as long as the glue keeps them from sliding in and out when you put the shoes in and out, they're going to be fine. Now what does matter is that this spacing for the dados for those dividers on my top, middle, and bottom piece all line up so that the dividers will go in straight and square and, you know, slide in there pretty easily. So I have set my fence for 5 11/16 inches from the outside of the dado blade. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top, the middle, and the bottom. I'm going to run them all over this fence. In the case of the middle section, I'm going to flip it over, run the other face. And I'm going to turn them all end for end and do it again. That way I'm sure I've got all 8 dados exactly the same distance in from the two ends and exactly lined up with one another. With the 2 dados towards the end cut, I can move the fence over so that I can cut the one in the center. And again, I'm going to run all of the pieces with the fence set in the same place so that if it's off, it'll at least be off the same on all of them. The top and the bottom are going to butt up against the sides like so. They can remain the full length that they are. But this center section, the one that has the dados on both sides, is going to have to sit inside of the side pieces. And that means it needs to be shorter. How much shorter? The thickness of the plywood times 2, but it has to come evenly off of both ends or else I'm going to mess up the alignment of the grooves. The process for getting the fence set up to make this cut is pretty simple, although you have to do it twice. So the first thing I've done is I've used my piece, the length it is now, to set the fence so that I'm cutting that same length again. Then I'm going to clamp a piece of off-cut plywood onto the fence, so now I've bumped it this way towards the blade by exactly the thickness of the wood. Now I can repeat the process. Take my spacer out, use the length of the workpiece to set the fence. Remember to flip it end for end. Clamp my spacer back on, and I'm ready to cut the other end. If you want to see if you got it right, stand your newly shortened centerpiece on top of your 2 sides and lean one of your tops or bottoms up against it. You should have a nice smooth flush edge up here, or at least something close. Because the dados for these dividers are so loose, I find it easier to go ahead and assemble the box and then cut the dividers to fit and slide them in. And of course, don't forget, all of this stuff is a whole lot easier to sand right now than it's going to be once it's assembled into a bunch of cubbies. So if your plywood isn't paint grade, then bust out the sander and do that now. Gluing and nailing together butt joints in plywood is not going to get you an article in Fine Woodworking magazine, but it's more than strong enough, and for a painted project that's going to sit on the floor of a kid's closet, I think it's fine. All right, when you put the middle section in here, you want to get it centered up and down, but it's not super critical because you're going to cut the dividers to fit later. So if it's a little high or a little low, no problem. Your cubbies will be slightly off, but nobody will know. What is important though is that it goes in flat and level so that all your dividers can be square. And the easy way to do that is to just cut yourself some spacer blocks that will prop it up on the corners and give you the right height and hopefully in the center. I used PVA glue on the ends of this center section. It's end grain, but I've got a pretty good tight fit and the nails are going to hold it in place anyway. Well, as advertised, I didn't get this shelf exactly in the center, The dividers that go in the bottom are 6 1/8 wide. The dividers that go in the top are 6 1/16 wide. PVA glue is a lousy gap filler, but these are neither visible nor structural. You could use epoxy if you want to. I don't really think it's necessary. What is necessary is liberal application of sandpaper around the edges of this plywood. It's sharp stuff, and it's got just enough in the way of little voids and stuff in it that the paint is going to look terrible. Even with the sanding, I decided that a layer of actual primer, I'm using Kills latex primer here, is going to go a long way to helping me cover this plywood before I get to painting. Spray is definitely the way to go for the top coat of paint. It's the only way to get in all those little cubbies. And even in the good ventilation of outside, a respirator is a great idea with spray paint. It's plywood and paint, but the recipient's happy with it, so I'm going to call this a success.